100.1, 99.5 FM, streaming in Georgetown, Guyana. We want to welcome all our fellow Guyanese and viewers around the world to Oil Talk with OGGN Guyana. We are a 501c3 not-for-profit organization registered with the Internal Revenue Service in the United States. And we are live on Kaito Radio, also streaming on YouTube and Facebook. My name is Charles Sugrin. I'll be the host for tonight. And tonight, our topic will be the lack of any independent monitoring of the deepwater oil fields. To help us through tonight's session is retired science teacher and OGGN director, Mr. Alfred Bulai, and TG president and OGGN member, Mr. Fred Collins, two outstanding sons of our soil. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Bulai, I want to start with you. Recently, I read in the newspaper that you're honored by the University of Guyana for 50 years of service. Can you tell our viewers and our audience, our listeners on radio, what was this honor for? And in doing that also, can you tell our listeners and our viewers why you're qualified to speak on our topic today, which is lack of any independent monitoring of the deepwater oil fields? So let us start with your honor at the University of Guyana.
Well, I'm a member of the University of Guyana Astronomical Society. And I'm not sure it was in the newspaper. I got a surprise on Tuesday night when the membership awarded me for 50 years of service to astronomy. You might didn't know that I was around that long in astronomy. But one of the lecturers unearthed some record about the 1973 eclipse, visible at 63 Beach. And I was involved in some way there. I wasn't there in 63 Beach, but I was connected with the people who went there. So they decided, unknown to me, that it's 50 years and it's time they bestow an award. By the way, there's an eclipse coming up on Saturday, October the 14th, a partial eclipse of the sun. Everybody should be able to see it on Saturday afternoon. Well, you were asking what makes me qualified to look at monitoring oil and gas. Well, by training, I used to teach at the University of Guyana. I retired in 2003, 20 years ago, as head of physical sciences. And I'm also a trained chemical engineer. Chemical engineering has to do with matter and time. In other words, the flow of matter. In this case, the matter is oil and gas. But I have applied my chemical engineering to many of the industries we have in Guyana. I mean, I did it with gold, and I can tell you some.
We'll get into that discussion with the gold later on.
Yes, if you have time. And people generally, we discover that there are certain sets of industries that do not like to be transparent. So I am qualified in that way. Now, I used to be a member of Transparency Institute, Guyana Inc., of which Fred is currently president. And in that organization, when we heard that oil and gas is coming, Fred had a lot of articles, led off on a lot of articles. But my immediate reaction was that monitoring would be a problem. because the leaders in Guyana that we have are very gullible. Or if not, if they're not gullible, they must be they must be really greedy and
Okay.
trying to get things from us. Now, monitoring
Yeah, Mr.
has
Balai, we'll get into the definition of monitoring in a minute. I just want to let our audience and our viewers know that you are competent and you are qualified as a chemical engineer to talk on this issue tonight. So I want Mr. Collins, if you don't mind, you're president of TG for many, many years. What makes you qualified to talk of this topic tonight?
Well, let's be very clear from the outset that I will not be addressing monitoring in the same way that my friend Alfred would be addressing it. I am not competent to talk about that. I did note, however, interestingly, when he spoke about his credentials in astronomy, I thought he was going to say he was so qualified to measure the astronomical expenses that Exxon is presenting us with. But it just goes to show he's well matched. But in my case, I have been one of the people involved in drafting the articles in 2019 as we began to examine the contract. And so I'm very well conversant with some of the flaws, some of the problems that we anticipated. I see my colleague Christopher Ram has finally come around to the position in one of his articles, his revelations a few days ago, as published in the Starbrook News, that the contract, the 1999 contract, people who handled the 1999 agreement were equally to blame for the position that we find ourselves in. We were saying that all the time, and we still say that. And the more we look into this contract, as I will point out a little later, the more we're finding problems from the very inception. So, and I also want to add that I have not been out of the teaching profession. I have been a teacher for a number of years, a math teacher, and I can tell you that what I see in the calculations of the blocks, if we had people who were sensitive to the mathematical implications of the contract, we would have perhaps realized what was going on. Alfred spoke about eclipses. Perhaps we have had some eclipses of our information for too long. And so our people who might have been qualified to make those observations thought that we were in good hands. Unfortunately, we have not been. And some of the things that I will be pointing out would be drawing that to the attention of the public, whose duty it is. I don't know where we have allowed this idea to settle that the politicians own the show. The politicians have been given the mandate to manage our affairs. Every one of us has a duty to pay attention and to demand that our affairs be treated in a certain way. In fact, because we have not been doing so, that is why we are having all of this problem. So I'm talking about monitoring from a macro standpoint. And by the way, today happens to be, as it turns out, the day in which we mark the International Day of Access to Information. So this discussion is taking place at a very appropriate moment.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. And for our viewers on radio and those of you watching on YouTube and on Facebook, Mr. Frederick Collins is one of those petitioners who petition our courts to have coverage, adequate coverage for a possible oil spill. The court ruled in his favor, and believe it or not, viewers, our government, went and appealed that decision instead of having a way out. That the court gave them a way out to say, Exxon, it's time to stand up and man up. They have now buckled to Exxon. Gentlemen, we're talking of monitoring today, lack of any independent monitoring. And monitoring can mean many things. Mr. Bulai, you're the engineer. What is monitoring and how different is monitoring from auditing as we know it?
Well, I mentioned some variables just now, matter and time. In the case of oil and gas, it amounts of oil and amounts of gas over time. I asked for this information um, over 2.5 years ago from the um, from Exxon. Now, let me come back to what you asked. What is monitoring and what is auditing? So we've got to get instruments and people there to read the instruments of the matter, oil and gas, over time. Now we plot these results. We have data on these things. Auditing is when we now reconciling what we have measured, the input and the output. They must all match. What goes in must come out. If it doesn't match. Something can blow out or, or get stolen. That is auditing. Now, auditing for a chemical engineer is, is cut and dried. I know that you are an accountant. You audit money. A value will be put on the matter, your oil and gas, and it's converted into money, and that's where you will come in. That's another dimension of auditing that I don't get into. I listen to those who do that. But I am able to trace the matter with respect to time. I can read those graphs, I can read the data. And that's the kind of monitoring that I will be looking at.
Excellent. And as you rightly said, accountants not only reconcile, the books and so on, and give an opinion on the state of the accounts, but we also do value for money audit as well, which is what government audit is really all about, should be all about, is do we get value for the money we spend? But that's a different audit. I don't know if the general is doing that kind of audit in Guyana, but I presume they're only looking through the invoice to ensure that whatever they receive, they spend, and they can, give. I think that's a different kind of audit than value for money audit. But right. You hit it correctly there. In the engineering field,
the Ministry of Natural Resources should be doing the kind of monitoring, the kind of chemical engineering monitoring 24/7 at the FPSOs.
Thank you. Mr. Collins, why should we monitor the production of oil and gas? Isn't the information supplied by Exxon sufficient?
Well, Alfred touched upon something just now when he said that some companies in the extractive industries don't like to be transparent. Well, if he were on the program that I was on last night, where there were some Caribbean environmental fighters talking about the difficulties in the Caribbean, you would have gotten the sense that none of them like to be transparent. Whether they're petroleum, whether they're gold, whatever it is, they do not like to be transparent. Whether it's uranium, as you can see in the case of the coup in Niger, what we're discovering now is that they have been paying Niger, they get $200 on the world market and paying Niger 80 cents, not even $80. And when you have this kind of extremism going on in terms of unfairness, nobody wants to be transparent. They want to keep it as secret as possible. So when we are talking about Exxon, don't expect with their track record, they're going to be any more transparent. And they've had decades of practicing what the finer arts of, I think it was the word eclipsing information. So when we're going to talk about the monitoring, my emphasis, as I touched upon just now, is going to be the context in which all of this monitoring of the petroleum is supposed to be taking place. It is supposed to be taking place in a context of competence, not so? Competence of our managing the entire industry, competence in terms of the technical inputs that you're getting, that you assume that are there from the inception of the contract, the drafting of the contract, etc., etc. What Tiggy has been finding out is that as we began to point out to the nation since 2019, there were some fundamentals that were not right. When we checked the calculations, we were hearing, for example, 600 blocks being bandied about. It is not 600 blocks. And it was the reason for that was a miscalculation, which apparently has been remedied in the 2016 agreement. But in the transition from what was written in the 1999 agreement to the 2016 agreement, there is still some confusion as to how this area turned into the right 26,800 square kilometers, because the area of one block, for those of us who know the math, to be able to calculate the 5-minute interval as it is defined in the agreement, it is 84.55 square kilometers for each block. That is the graticular block defined by the maths. Now, when you divide that into 26,800, what you get is 317 and not 600. So where the politicians got the 600 from is anybody's guess. But what we're discovering is that there has been some confusion with regard to the definition of the contract area. And it is a little worrying the more we look at it, because as you know, you don't want, if you're going to have to sell or have a lease of a tract of land, a bad description, an invalid description of the property. That is what we seem to have. And how do we know that? Because when you look at the wording of the agreement, the 1999 agreement, what you're going to discover is that the wording does not match. In about 50% of the cases, the wording does not match the plotting of the points. Now, this is a new discovery that we've made, and we are doing some more analysis on it. What we have found up to now, however, from one of the people who have been capable of doing the analysis, and when I say that, don't get the impression, let me make sure our readers, our listeners understand this very well. This thing is not so technical where you're hearing, but oil is this technical. What I am talking about here is what I used to teach my high school students in 1978, spherical geometry. It is what also any surveyor, and there ought to be hundreds of them practicing in Guyana, ought to have been able to calculate. Why is it then that there is such confusion with regard to the definition of this area that is clearly in evidence in the 1999 agreement? It means that the persons who were in charge of it did not understand the importance of getting the technical input from the people who knew. And I'm beginning to wonder if the failings that we have been seeing for decades with regard to the mathematics, our efficiency, our pass rates in mathematics, have not translated into the kind of incompetence that we are seeing in terms of that contract. So I am talking about the monitoring from a macro standpoint, the competence of the people who are supposed to be monitoring. What is the support? This is not the kind of industry that a guy can, a maximum leader decides that he is so important, he can ignore the mathematics, he can ignore the geography, he can ignore the people who he's supposed to have had a team. What happened to the competence of those inputs that deliverable by those inputs we were supposed to have? So that is the context on which I was coming from in terms of the monitoring.
Mr. Collins, I'm glad you mentioned that too, because, and that's a problem we have in our country, maybe Guyana, around the Caribbean, the whole world. When you speak up, and both of you said it very clearly, and you said it especially, Mr. Collins, that the politicians are there to govern, and the people, the populace, need to speak out. The only way you can speak out in a country like Guyana is if you agree with the politicians. If you don't agree with them, they demonize you, and that has been our experience with the PNC, the PP, exactly the same thing. None is better than the other. But
Can I back you up there? Can I back you up there?
Yeah.
One, this is exactly the problem. in the 1980s, we were told by the politicians, there were people going around telling us, you don't bother about politics. You leave politics to us. We know what we're doing. They did not. What we are seeing now, we have exchange. We have people telling us the same thing, a different group. It is clear that these parties one came out of the other. So when we have people trying to tell us that this is a feature of a particular party, it seems to be in their genes.
Yeah, all right. And I want to just ask before I get back to Mr. Pillai, is TG, is it any ET, the Extractive Industry Transparency Institute, have they reported on this anomaly you're talking about? Instead of 600 blocks, in your view, is less than 600 blocks, right?
Yes. As I indicated just now, the graticular block, the area of a graticular block, if you calculate it, and now not only did Alfred and I arrive at 84.55 independently, and if you know how many numbers there are in the universe, you would know that the chances of that being incorrect are next to nil if that happens. But we also had recently another member of the group who has done his own independent calculation for his own, verify that amount. So if you divide 84.55 into the known area of the Stabroek block, which is 26,800, what you are going to get is approximately 317, not 600. Okay. Where our politicians got that from, I don't know, but I suspect where they got it from, it was a miscalculation.
Okay. Mr. Pillai, Mr. Collins mentioned the Niger experience, that they're extracting their, and I want to segue quickly into what is on land. Do you think OMI gave us, we could have monitored OMI production of gold when they were there in Guyana? Or did we monitor it?
That was a long story. Now, I just take the opportunity to mention that I did work for non-extractive industry, and they were quite transparent. They weren't stealing anything. And when I did mention industry, I didn't specifically say extractive, but I can see with Fred, I don't know of any extractive industry that is not exploiting over and above what they're supposed to do. Yeah, well, coming back to oh my gold mine is limited. Now I had after the first, I remember there was a cyanide spill. There were two spills. There was a small one and a large one. After this small one, I got up at the hearing and said that there should be flow meters. I mean, this is cyanide. This is a major flow. This is a major component of getting the gold. So the cyanide should be monitored. I mean, for all safe occupational health and safety purposes, as well as for production. We know it has to be monitored for production, but for safety's sake, please. Now, so I discovered that there were no log books, log data available. And so we had a second and bigger spill, and still there was nothing available. Now, after the second spill, the public was invited to go and see, the place, and they tried to be very friendly. However, during those hearings, I got up and asked certain particular questions. I remember asking about an E8 pH diagram. That's a technical thing. That would tell me something about the process. Now, I know the metallurgical engineers, they heard what I said. So now, at the time, I was teaching in University of Guyana. And I was teaching inorganic chemistry about, these our industries, bauxite, gold, sugar, and so forth. So I said, well, we can take the opportunity to visit. The students can go to visit. We arranged a visit. We all showed up we have to be taken by bus. We showed up. Nothing happened. Nobody came. So I called up and he said, "Oh, we thought it was next week." No, all right. So I hustled up, made arrangements, and said, "Okay, we will be ready next week." When next week came, again, no show. We were told, "Oh, we thought it was last week." No, well, that was the last straw. Now, the reason they do not want the cyanide monitored is that there is what is known as a stoichiometric relation between the cyanide and the gold.
Can you repeat that one more time for our viewers on radio and our viewing audience?
A stoichiometric relation. The chemists know what I'm talking about. There is a direct relation between the amount of cyanide used and the amount of gold produced, provided you can get how much cyanide is recycled and how much is lost. Nobody wanted to tell me. The EPA had just started in the late 90s, and I kept bugging them because that's their job. They're supposed to find out those things. But this is what they tell me. We have to ask OMI. Now, that attitude has pervaded us, at least since then. I mean, I proved it there. So that's the attitude now. Oh, we got to ask Exxon. And they're quite happy about it up to today. The only difference was when Vincent Adams was running the EPA. This guy, he knew what to ask for. And he was asking for monitoring 24/7. Now, this monitoring is a dangerous thing. I said to Fred when we were discussing this thing in the early days, I said it's dangerous because anybody who monitoring has to be there with armed guard. If you go there monitoring and you're not backed up, some accident could happen. You fall along between something, and you write it off because you probably might have discovered something. So you've got to have sufficient people there monitoring 24/7 with backup. There's another dimension to it, which if we have time, I will touch on.
Okay, thank you for that. So on land, we couldn't monitor it. And now we are way out in the Atlantic and we are not monitoring either. Well, of recent, the EPA head, Mr. Parashram, said that they will use satellite to do some monitoring. Mr. Bulai, Mr. Collins, what is this guy talking about?
I don't know if he if he knows what it. You see, firstly, satellite can only detect what has happened. If there's a spill, it's not going to prevent it. It can only is something after the fact, after the horse has bolted. We can find out who to blame. That's the first thing. Completely useless. What we want is people there to prevent a spill because they are always checking. So the current EPA has to rely on Exxon for that. And Exxon isn't going to necessarily tell them that, some hiccups are happening and, we're getting in trouble. Only when they really have to will they actually do it. And the people at the EPA were going, I saw that Dr. Adams was beginning to introduce training. But the current lot at EPA, many of them are my former students. At least so they tell me. So, and I know that they have only come out with certain levels of qualification, and they are not qualified to monitor that thing. They have to be trained. That's what Dr. Adams was introducing when he was unceremoniously removed. this is the kind of thing that Fred was talking about. They don't want people who know things. They want people who don't know to do the monitoring. Another thing with this satellite monitoring, I sent a text, Mr. Parsram, because he had some years ago invited me, a couple of years ago, invited me to see the setup that they're going to have. I said, I'm not here to fight you. I am here to help. In what way? Because it's my country. I'm not going to be paid to do it. I'm not looking for pay, but I just want to see that the country get things done properly. And so he made promises. He said nobody ever picked up a phone to call him and tell him what to do. Wonderful. A few months later, however, he stopped responding to my WhatsApp text and query. So one can only conclude that somebody must have picked up the phone and called him. I'm sad to say that, I can relate other incidents later if we have time on the program.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Collins, Mr. Bulai mentioned the OMI spill, and then for the production, we couldn't monitor that. We couldn't even measure the conversion from, the extractive of the raw product to gold produced. And we're in the same boat right now. And as you know, the EPA had just mirrored what the VP said, that they will use satellite, and of course they piggyback on Exxon. Who you think should be responsible? As I've been saying all the time, as you said, politicians said, "Oh, we know what we are doing. We got this. We're gonna do it." We are 50-odd years independence, and we see recently the president was here in New York, and he showed a beautiful film, so to speak, of future development. But all those development is borrowed funds. They're not coming from Guyana's resource. They're coming from borrowed funds. Our grandchildren and great-grandchildren have to pay it back. Is our politicians doing a good job, Mr. Collins, in monitoring?
Well, I can tell you, somebody sent me on social media the same material. This is a 100-page document, though. It looks pretty snazzy. And we have been good at producing things like that.
Can you turn your camera? We're not seeing you.
I have seen, I have just taken a look at an old World Bank document from since 1982. And believe you me, that document was while talking about efforts at finding petroleum and exploration, identified the need for training of the petroleum technical competence since 1982. So we are very good at recycling old needs. And this Nazi document that you're talking about, I have seen many like that. All we're using now is the technology to do an old trick, which is to produce these documents. Now, you asked about OMI just now, and this brings out part of what we're dealing with. One of our colleagues disclosed to us that a certain gold company, let me put it that way, a certain gold company that has the history in Guyana, he met as a taxi driver some years ago. The guy met him in Miami when he said, "You Guyanese?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Man, I was the guy that used to fly the gold out from such and such a place." You hear that? You're talking about monitoring? He said, "I was the guy who used to fly the gold out from a certain location when a certain gold company was operating in Guyana." Let me tell you another story. These guys don't know that, unfortunately, Guyanese, they don't know Guyanese are all around the world. One of my contacts was at a social gathering, and the guy did not realize that Guyanese were in his hearing. And he was saying, and he was from that very company, and he was saying that very gold company I just spoke about just now. And he said, "I don't know why the Guyanese are so lax. They can't believe their good fortune. You're talking about monitoring? That was in the 90s. And Charles, like a tailor who takes one good look at your pants and he decides which one of his workers he will give it. We are going to be having the same kind of experience over and over again, unless the people of this country realize that there's only one thing we can do. It is in our interest to stop it. And hopefully we will stop it before all the oil goes. And I want to point out to you how serious a matter it is, because at the conference over the last few months I've been attending, not attempting. What is clear is that there is something that is most excuse me. These extractives are very powerful people, man. They're affecting my voice. Yes, if we are not careful, they are going to be doing what is their program all over the world, secretly getting into deals with our politicians. And before we know it, we have lost the best resources in our country. This corruption that we look and we are accusing our leaders of, we rightfully do it. But this thing is a world, something that is happening around us, and they look for collaborators. And if we do not watch it, if we continue to point and say, oh, you don't know what you're talking, of course I know what I'm talking about. The Constitution requires all three of us on this program to pay attention to what is going on. It is our business. It is our assets. It is our children's assets. It is not the leaders' assets. They can't decide what information they're going to give us and what they're going to keep behind the screen, unless it is military. The Constitution gives us that duty and that right. Unfortunately, our leaders from since the British never taught us what our rights were. So our politicians are free to fool those of us who don't pay attention to say that what they call those of us who brought the case busybodies. And people will accept that kind of nonsense because they're not taking the trouble to educate and inform themselves.
And to your viewers listening on radio, this is Charles Sugrim. You're listening to Oil Talk with OGGN Guyana on 99.1, 99.5 FM. For those of you watching us on YouTube and Clospan, we have with us Mr. Alfred Bulai and Mr. Frederick Collins to take us through the discussion. Mr. Bulai, Mr. Collins made remarkable points there not too long ago in his last statement. When will the Guyanese wake up to stand up for what is rightfully belong to all Guyanese, not the politicians? And as Mr. Collins just said, the politicians decide what you should get or what you should see, what you shouldn't see. That only applies to the military or state secret, not production of our oil and gas, not production of our gold, not production of our timber. We want to talk about Burma, we want to talk about Shinlin. These guys, there was no monitoring. They export tremendous amount of our forestry is renewable, but the gold and oil and gas is not renewable. Yet they extract all these resources and they walk away scot-free, and our politicians don't see any problem with that.
Yes, this brings me to the other dimension, a consequence of lack of monitoring. When the big ones get away with lack of monitoring and fraud, they can't reconcile monies. This $214 million that could not be properly audited, would not be accounted for. When people get away with this, the youngsters, sorry, not the youngsters yet, but those under them, well, we can get away with it too. And their children see that too. And so this corrupts the entire society. We had it, I mean, since I saw it happening since the days of rigging elections. Well, I didn't pay attention to the 1968 one, but I paid close attention to the 1973 election rigging, and I saw the consequences. I was a school teacher then, and I saw bit by bit this corruption take over. The people who knew what they had to do and knew what was going on, they left the country. I decided that, I said, well, Bonham is not going to get rid of me. But I couldn't do much. I could only write in the Catholic standard. You couldn't get into anything else. Of course, I was a Catholic. But I mean, the, 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 the fora for expressing yourself, ourselves, were very limited. No, but the same system was there. People were afraid to speak out. Those who could preferred to travel. And the same thing is happening. It's still happening today. People, if you are bright enough, I've seen students come out of school and they want to know where to go to work. They can only end up with high-paying jobs if they will ultimately say yes to something that they know shouldn't be done. And even so, when you're young, you don't really know for sure that this shouldn't be done. What you need is an example. You come out of school and you say, well, this is the real world. In the real world, we do things this way, not the way you learn it in school. You got to do the way this and this person said it must be done. Now, that doesn't work in proper industry because there are certain procedures. I mean, as a chemical engineer, as a chemist, as a physicist, an engineer, I know that certain things, the professional standard. But a young person coming up is not going to look at those professional standards. He's going to look at the professors, those who are supposed to be carrying out the standard. When he doesn't see that, well, he'll say yes for a while, and then in time, we'll find a way to go somewhere to other places.
Succumb,
And
yeah.
so we're left with a set of people who don't know how to monitor. They are not qualified. And that plays into the hands of the politicians where they can marginalize overseas people. Many members in OGGN live overseas. I, as someone living in Guyana, Fred and I, we are very glad when such people apply their expertise to what we have here. Unfortunately, the politicians have developed an attitude that they have no business doing that.
And the sad news, Mr. Bala, is that when the foreigners want to come there, well, not foreigners, the Guyanese who live overseas, they're Guyanese in the first place, they're called opportunists, and that's the problem. Yeah. Anyway, on our first program, Dr. Brandley and Dr. Hunt, they talk about, and both of you are privy to it, OGGN proposed 55 barrels for every 100 barrel produced. 55 barrels should go to the benefit of Guyana and Guyanese. How difficult will that be to monitor? We have seen the fiasco in the audit. There's fiasco all over the place.
That's the simplest possible method. All we have to do is have people there monitoring that, and we don't have to worry about anything else. No, that is the genius of OGGN, to come up with a system that can do this. But since, the politicians have already confused it, this confusion is in their interest. They like confusion. They like to make things complicated. Not as simple as OGGN makes it. All OGGN wants is just that fraction. And it compared nicely with what people getting properly in other countries.
Charles, can I come in here?
Yes, sure, definitely.
Now, I'm afraid that for the first time on the program, Alfred and I have to disagree. He's attributing that idea to the genius of OGGN. Unfortunately, it is a lack of common sense that makes our politicians, or something worse, that makes them go for that alternative. You know, Tiggy gets information from a lot of sources, and one of our sources told us that when our representatives were considering, when they were about to meet with Exxon, they were told, don't go for any complicated arrangement. Go for the simple thing, just like what OGGN is. That is common sense. You don't have the capacity to go through all this foolishness. It doesn't take genius to do that. It's the same thing with the ring fencing. These things sound complicated and it's simpleton. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to belittle anybody. But when Tiggy was putting together, when we heard about the oil and so on, we were putting together a set of questions. And one of the first things that occurred to us, you don't have to know about oil. All you have to, you know, the Americans say good fences make good neighbors. You hear that somewhere along. So you ask yourself the question, how are you going to separate the operations from one well, whether productive or from another? You know, these are questions, that commonsensical questions that what we also said is that we wanted to make sure that people like you and OGGN who live outside, people who have access and who are Guyanese, we have exported, that have worked in these places, so we can get the benefit from them, see this contract. We had no idea that even while we were writing that, they were making sure, they were being hustled in secret to make sure that Guyana doesn't have the benefit of its brains and those people outside. So they sign it at the behind the scenes, so that by the time we know, it's an accomplished fact. And we see all the signs, fortunately or unfortunately, we can see the signs of the hurry that they were in. But in terms of this formula, it's a simple one. And I want to re-emphasize much of this nonsense that you're hearing about petroleum, so complicated. There's some things that are very simple.
And you know what? I'm sorry I didn't get the opportunity to present the data, what will translate into dollars and cents. But I did a YouTube video when I was out for 60 barrels per 100, but OGN is asking for 55. With 60 barrels, Guyana will be super rich. We will not be borrowing a penny from anyone to develop our country, because we'll have so much revenue coming in from our oil and gas. And it was, you know, again, last week the president was here, and some supporter of Glenn Lal was there. And they played a tape when Barra Jagdeo was as opposition leader. He said very clear that we will negotiate this contract when we get back into government. Very, very clear. Mr. Bolai, Mr. Collins, what is the problem?
When did he say that? When he came when?
No. This was the tape that they played the guy was playing on the street. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's what Mr. Jagdeo said when he was opposition leader.
Well, obviously, I can't see how people can change so radically in so short a time unless they have been compromised. They have been corrupted. If somebody else has another explanation, let me know. I can't believe that our politicians are so stupid that they can't see what to do. My only explanation is that they have been compromised. They have been corrupted. I'm willing to hear somebody have another theory, but I can't, in human nature, I can't find any other explanation.
Mr. Collins, you're a professional. Mr. Bulla is a professional. I'm a professional. I've never seen the stupidity of a government where you're borrowing money to develop your country and you're giving away all of your resources that are not renewable. Does that make any sense to you, Mr. Bulla, Mr. Collins?
Well, if that made any sense to me, I should never have been the math teacher that I said I was. I mean, Alfred puts it in the best way he could. It makes no sense. And to him, he can only think of one alternative. I would put it a little differently. When I was on the commission, the local content commission with Mr. Doctor, there was a gentleman on the panel from Trinidad, a Trinidadian lawyer, and he said something I never forgot. He said, Fred, when it is not making sense and you're doing it, it is making dollars for somebody. And I would say no more.
That's a very good way to put it. Excellent. Okay, so let's get back to the monitoring now, our topic tonight. So OGGN proposed 55 barrels for every 100 barrels. This contract can be renegotiated. The contract says it can be renegotiated when both parties come to the table. So far, our government has refused to even invite, as far as we know, there's not public, maybe they did privately, but the publicly, no one knows if they ask Exxon to come back to the table for renegotiation. They're taking all this local content bill and so on, which is crumbs compared to the real meat that we're giving away. So, gentlemen, how different will monitoring of that 55 for 100 barrels be than what monitoring is going on today? And I'm sure there is monitoring. How different will that monitoring be?
No, the monitoring by whom? Exxon is certainly monitoring. They are the operators of the oil concessions, and they must monitor. If they don't monitor, they might lose control. It is you must have monitoring in order to control. There is monitoring, and they must be they obviously using the highest technology. They're using satellites and so forth, and they are there 24/7. Something happens, the compressor gets too hot, you can see it. In fact, they see it on the meters. Nobody wants an FPSO to blow up. Lives will be lost, the reputation will be lost, money will be lost. They want to have the thing get the thing done. But we are not there monitoring how much. Suppose now a tanker comes up and starts filling up. How do we know? How do we Guyanese know how much is going into that tanker? We taking Exxon data. I mean, in the bad old days, when we had to line up for gasoline in the 70s and the 80s, somebody would drive up to the pump, and the pump attendant would put in the gasoline. But then somebody, you see somebody and say hi, and you start to talk to them. If you don't monitor what is going on, you could very well pick up a can, push in something, you pay for it, and give it to his friend. That kind of thing could happen. And this is why we have to be there all the time. Now, both in the common sense method, which I said, why I said OGGN genius, because they have formulated it nicely, not because it's not obvious.
But they can claim credit for it. OGGN can claim credit for that proposal. It's a really great proposal, and it's simple.
And so that it could be implemented and negotiated. But what you got to be there in both instances. You got to be there. But monitoring as would be required today, even if you were there, you're at your wit's end. You've got to be very, very competent and highly qualified to know what is going on there, to read those meters and have your own system to check. Now, if you're doing it the common sense way, the way OGGN has proposed, then all you need to do is monitor how much is going. So all you do is go to the pump, check the manifolds, check that every outlet has a meter. You know, if you don't have a meter there, you gotta know. And you have your own people there and the tankers checking out, spying out the thing. Where are those lines going to? So, and they must match. That's all the thing. You can't do it if you're not there.
Yeah, and to our listeners on radio, 99.1, 99.5 FM, I want to let you know this, and for those of you watching on YouTube and Facebook, if we get 55 barrels of oil for every 100 barrels produced, Guyana will get over 15 billion, with a B, $15 billion a year in revenue from our oil. And if we monitor the gold production, Mr. Bulai talk about, we get another couple $100 million there. We are losing money all over the place. And Mr. Collins put it rightly. If it doesn't make sense, somebody's making dollars somewhere. Mr. Collins, we have limited time remaining. Based on our discussion tonight, what action should our fellow Guyanese, and Guyanese, it is up to you. You decide your future. Don't think the politicians should control you. The politicians are elected to govern, not to control you. We have been like sheep. We've been following them blindly. You gotta wake up, Guyanese, wake up. So Mr. Collins and Mr. Bulai, for the next 5 minutes we have left, what action should the public take with regard to what we discussed today?
Well, first of all, I've been hinting, the public has got to really wake up and realize that we are not troublemakers. And if we are troublemakers, there need to be some troublemakers. There need to be more of us. There needs to be the realization that our politicians are not kings. We don't elect kings. We elect managers of our affairs. And if what is going on in this country, like the 214 reduced to 3 million US, if that had happened in the private sector, somebody would be fired immediately. And that would be fired in a company that pays tax. So what we are seeing unfold before the outworkings of a slackness, a carelessness of leadership, a dereliction of duty, where people are prepared because of whatever force is coming against them or their own failings to represent things to the parliament that ought not to be. Zero taxes. Two parties get together to put that, and then you issue a statement as if they did. That is the legalization of fraud. Now, once you have gotten that kind of mentality and you have sold that to your Guyanese, have got to wake up. We are hypnotized. I want to get this one in quickly because it tells you how badly we're off. Chris Ram correctly pointed out that there is stuff that, with regard to the audit, yes, that was not and he pointed out, he said, if this is what you can see the discrepancy, and if that's not fraud, then what is on the part of Exxon? What he missed, and what the whole nation, because this thing is so leaky, nobody's fault. What a lot of people have missed, and I want it to be registered. The 1999 contract made reference to a budget. SO was to prepare a budget annually. You know what a budget is? Well, you're an accountant, Charles, so you know that that's a forecast of what they are going to spend and on what. So that when years down the line, they materialize this 400 and something million, almost $500 million expenses.
You're comparing against the budget, right?
You're comparing it again. You're not hearing any mention of that. You mean to tell me everybody missed the ball?
Yeah,
Why
that's
is
our,
it
that's our politicians, Mr. Collins. There you go, our politicians.
how can all of us miss the ball? It is there in the contract. And many of us are business managers. We run our own business. We are employees and we are told to make a budget. It is there in the 1999 agreement. They were supposed to produce a budget. And everybody seems to have forgotten that. So they materialize suddenly out of a hat, 400 and something, almost $500 million, without reference to the budget. Where are the budgets?
Well said, Mr. Collins. Mr. Pulai, what should the people of, we only have a minute left, so what should the people of Guyana do to wake up and to stand up against these atrocities committed to the people of Guyana by these foreign companies?
I don't know, honestly, what the people of Guyana, all I know is what I can do. And I am trying to let people know, I mean, by what I'm writing and what I'm saying. I don't want the next generation to come and ask me, what have I been doing while this ripping off has been taking place? And I don't know if people in Guyana want to have that on their conscience. They should take responsibility for what is happening now and not wait until it has happened, until we living in the region of the Dutch disease, then to say we should have done this and we should have done that. The time to do it is now, is to make the politicians know what it is we require of them. And to do it loudly. But unfortunately, people want to take a safe way out and say nothing.
Thank you, Mr. Balai, and to all our listeners on radio, 99.1, 99.5, we want to thank you for being with us. We want to thank our viewers on YouTube and on Facebook. Gentlemen, 1 minute each. Anything in closing? Mr. Balai, we can start with you.
Yes, I would have liked, especially today being, as Fred informed us, being World Access to Information Day. I would have liked to talk a little bit about that. I mean, our ability to access information. And I have things to talk about with reference to our Venerable Commissioner of Information and the information that he owes, that I've requested according to the method that he set out. I would like to talk about the Bureau of Statistics, and the EPA and the kinds of thing we experience. The Ministry of Natural Resources and the reaction. All those things I've lived through because I've been doing it. But time is short. Maybe in another program.
And yeah, definitely I'll get you back on another program. We'll discuss some of those issues. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Mr. Collins, anything in closing?
I would only like to say at this point that we need to recognize that the Exxon, the petroleum industry, how it has developed in Guyana, has exposed all of the billions we spend and are spending on education as frustrated. It is as though we are spending those billions for export of our people. We know that, but not even the residue has enabled Guyana to withstand the ravages of a rampaging multinational. And we are rendered a trivial society. Our laws are compromised. Our politicians are compromised. We need to realize that it is no sense spending billions upon billions if your country is not benefiting from that education. That is only one thing I want to say.
Thank you, gentlemen. And as you said, like Mr. Collins, you mentioned the foreigners mentioned Guyana is so gullible, and they know they found Pakus living in our country. So what do you do, Paku? We bust them back. That is what they do. And Guyana, we are the recipient of that. You can wake up or you can continue to sleep. That is your choice. It is up to the people of Guyana to decide that. Again, this is Oil Talk with OGGN Guyana, the 501c3 not-for-profit organization here registered in the United States. So we want to thank all of our viewers for watching. We'll be back again to talk with you and to discuss another topic within the next 2 weeks. So until then, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, our viewers. And thank you, Kaitio Radio. God bless our great country of Guyana. Thank you.